Every moment in life has the potential to be phenomenal. At Amy Boyle Photography, we specialize in capturing those moments, whether it's for your business, a milestone event, or a personal portrait. As the host of the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, I know the power of storytelling, and I bring that same passion to my photography. Let's create images that celebrate who you are and what you stand for. Visit amyboylephotography.com to schedule your session today. Welcome to the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, where we explore the extraordinary stories and insights of women who are redefining what it means to be phenomenal. I'm your host, Amy Boyle, and today we're in conversation with Kishori Cook, a woman who blends the art of mindfulness, beauty of simplicity, and the power of holistic living. Join us as we uncover how Kishori transformed chaotic spaces into peaceful havens and shares her journey of embracing life's challenges with grace and clarity. This is the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast. Welcome to the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, Kishori. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here, Amy. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we have so much to talk about today, but I'd love it if you give our audience an introduction to the phenomenal you.
The phenomenal me. I really thrive and I'm phenomenal at finding clarity in the chaos. So whether that's like a chaotic space or a chaotic conversation, I really love clearing space and making space. And in doing that, I'm really driven by beauty and deliciousness. Those are my pillars that guide me as I go and clear space.
What led you to this path of space clearing, and for personally, and I think also professionally, right? For others.
Yeah. It's been something that I just discovered professionally in the last couple of years, but it's something I've been doing my entire life. Like I've always helped people clear their spaces, organize their closets, organize their rooms. I was constantly reorganizing my own room growing up, changing the furniture around and trying to make it feel more cozy or be more flow. And but I never thought of it as a profession. I didn't even know it was something you could do professionally until recently, in the last couple of years, as I was exploring new possibilities on my a new iteration of me, and discovered that it actually is something that people really need help with. And it's something that I'm really good at. And I love being able to help people who, especially their situations, these chaotic or cluttered experiences for people make them feel very anxious. And I walk in and I'm excited, like, oh, how can we reset this and make it feel really good?
What are some of the steps that when you first look at a space that you take in for figuring out what's going to be the best for either yourself? Like you said, you did this a lot when you were little and going forward, but for others, like, is there a lot of intake to figure that out, or what are you looking for?
That's a great question. And it's very different with each person and with each setting. I don't have sort of like a set intake form or anything like that. It's more about, the first thing is for me to go into the space, and a lot of the knowing comes intuitively for me. And the most important thing for me is to connect with the person I'm helping first. And then that kind of clearing and organizing comes later. So I try to set the space, hold space for them to be able to maybe tell me about how they move in the space, what's frustrating them about it, what their dream would be, how they'd love to see it, how they want to feel in the space, because that's a lot of it is how creating a space where people can feel. The words that come up are often people don't want to feel as stressed, don't want to feel as anxious. They want to feel calm. They want to feel like they can breathe. So these are things, it's having a conversation with the person first and really understanding what they're craving and how they want to live in that space.
And then as far as your background in mindfulness and yoga and even art history, I would think they all interrelate really nicely once you figure out how to put that together to help others.
Yes, exactly. It's all connected, because when your surrounding space feels like there's flow, feels like it's open, feels like it's clear, your inner space is automatically calmer. People I work with, one of the first things they'll say is, "Oh my gosh, this feels so much better. I feel so much better. I feel like more relaxed. I feel calmer." And so there's this deep connection, whether we realize it or not, whether we're conscious of it or not, to our surrounding space and our inner space. And so it's, yes, it is streamlined with mindfulness, that being present, and really tuning into how you're feeling in a space, and then, living holistically is really about thinking about all of the things we do in our everyday life, how we take in information, the conversations that we have, what we eat, how we move. And so our space is obviously, we're moving, we're thinking, we're eating, we're dreaming in our space. So it's part of the flow of holistic well-being, to have your space organized in a way that feels good to you.
Any particular teaching or part of the certification processes you've been through for multiple different things? Was there any one area or lesson, if you will, that has transformed who you are today?
Wow. That's a really good question. And the first thing that comes to mind is we're constantly transforming. And so there have been many of those moments, I think, in my life. As at this point of my life, I really feel like life is this constant transformation. And it's for me, it's been this process of healing and shedding and finding clarity about who I am and what I want and what I can bring to the world, to help support other people. And so there's so many teachings. I mean, I started my whole um, conscious stepping into this space of holistic wellness was through meditation, when it was over 20 years ago now, and I couldn't sleep. And so someone said, "Why don't you try meditation to fall asleep?" And so that's how I started. And then I got more curious about it and started meditating while I was awake. And then that took me into yoga and the path of yoga, and and all the sacred teachings and the practical teachings. And then that took me into exploring, life and death as a part of life, and how can we honor that part of our life and not be afraid of it. And that took me into death doula certification. Um, and so, in my own process, I guess, of healing and shedding layers, there have been these different points that have, um, back to your question, been key points or key teachings along the way, depending on whether it was yoga or meditation or mindfulness or death, and all in this idea. I think for where I am right now, it feels like, okay, there's so much sadness and stress and tension in the world, and that's part of life. That's part of this. We're all cohabitating on this planet. So how can I maybe be a part of the solution? How can I be part of lifting up the vibration, lifting up people's spirit, helping maybe move with more ease through all of this chaos and challenges on Earth?
Couldn't agree more about this the way life feels more stressful, and I think it's the immediacy of everything. We can't escape certain things. If you open your phone or your computer, they're just constantly bombarded with messages. So when someone is seeking inner ease or peace, what is something that is a practical tip that you could share with our listeners to help just center and bring back?
It's certainly not going to be anything new, nothing that you never heard before. Just pause. Just pause and tune into your breath, and start slowing your breath down in and out, and bring all of your focus to that. Breathing in and breathing out. You're just alive. So you're welcoming the breath in and welcoming the breath out. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't have to be sitting in a certain position or being in a certain place, right where you are. So that's the first thing I often do, is just like, okay, in all the chaos, where's my breath? How is my breath? Can I slow it down? And then there's all sorts of science behind that, but that's the quick tip.
It's just so hard at times to just even acknowledge that dire need for that pause. And it's like, oh, but if I'm going to
Mm,
lose time if I pause, right? I'm going to be late if I pause, or my project's not going to be turned in on time if I pause. But what we turn in if we don't pause, or what we might not turn in at all if we don't pause, could be very minor, or it could just be catastrophic, right? It's one of those crazy things. So
exactly.
I know that, you prefaced it with it's nothing new, but the fact that we still don't do it regularly and we need to be reminded is a really important thing.
It's funny because oftentimes um, it's actually very simple. It's a simple practice. I mean, if you're alive, you're breathing, and it's a really powerful tool to work with your breath in many different ways, to calm your nervous system, to slow your heart rate, um, to be present. So it's really simple and it's always accessible, but it's not easy. That's the trick, right? It's not always easy to remember that really you only need a couple minutes, and it's going to help move forward in a more productive way with whatever you're doing.
You've said deliciousness a couple different times now, and I want
Mm.
to jump in with that. How can our listeners create a more delicious life? What does that look like to you?
I guess that I should talk about, yeah, what it looks like for me, because it's different for everybody. And for me, it's been part of this um, journey of like being human and understanding what means to be human, and how can we enjoy it more, especially in times of challenge or struggle. And for me, um, what has helped me feel grounded and connected to life has been thinking about, how do I feed all of my senses? So, sight, taste, smell, sound, all of the senses. It's been the path of beauty and deliciousness is what has helped me. I love food. I love to cook. I love to um, make yummy food. I love to eat yummy food. I So that's feeding my senses of the smell, even the sight and taste. I love beauty in the form of nature. A lot of times, if I'm having one of those moments of, oh my God, there's all this chaos, what do I next? Where do I go? Then my pause will be walk out the front door and get myself out in nature and just admire, cultivate some of that awe and wonder that nature brings. And that's another form of beauty. And it's delicious, in a sense. Like, delicious doesn't always need to be a flavor. It can be something you're hearing or seeing. A delicious sound can be the sound of summer rain. So it's that cooling rain on a hot summer night, or at least summer in the northern hemisphere. So beauty beyond like cosmetic beauty, and deliciousness beyond flavor. Like, how can we um, I've expanded those words, because they mean, like, it can be a beautiful smell, it can be a delicious sound, it can be a delicious feeling, sensation.
I like using different adjectives that we normally assign with certain things, like deliciousness, you think of food, but it is now when you think about visual deliciousness, like it is literally a
Mm,
feast for our eyes, right? It's maybe it's a
right.
tapestry, it's a texture, it's the quality of the paint on a canvas. And that also rich, delicious,
Hmm.
enveloping, all these neat things that again requires us to pause to take it all in, because it's a moment we see certain things at first glance, but then on really taking it in, we're seeing more and more. We might be hearing more, we might be tasting more, right? If we just eat really quickly because we're hungry, we're not taking in all the all that deliciousness, all that extra.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, and another thing kind of leads from that is, so you spent more than a few years in Italy. I would think that this would
Mhm.
form who you are and why these things are part of your core pillars and everything else. What was that experience life you were like, and you were just recently back for a while? What is it like to go back to a place that really formed you at a younger point in your life?
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely was pivotal for me and unexpected. I feel like I was really, really lucky to be immersed in a place that is sort of it's the epitome of beauty and deliciousness. I mean, there's beauty and deliciousness everywhere you go. In the history, the architecture, the food, the culture, the language, the fashion, the art. I mean, it is just, you're fully immersed in it. And so I think, yes, to your point, that is probably where I really discovered um, that beauty and deliciousness are just my happy place. Um, these pillars that really help guide my life. I went originally to work in the arts. I was an art history major, and I received an internship at the Guggenheim in Venice, and so my big plan was to go do that, and then I was going to move to New York City and be in the arts and work in art education and help uh, people connect through beauty through art. And then life had some different plans for me, and I ended up staying in Italy for 17 years doing a lot of different things. Yes, a big, big, big part of my life. And now I'm exploring beauty and deliciousness back in the States.
I would think that just having those experiences, I look at the world differently after being inspired by a different location, just changing up the routine, seeing things through a different lens from the people who live in a different city, region, and then bringing that back. So that's a lovely tie-in. I'd like to talk more about like the interconnectedness of people. That's something that seems to really resonate with you. And as a world traveler, or what have you realized about our interconnectedness?
Mm, we're a lot more similar than we are different. And when we can be curious about that, we can learn a lot. So I find it interesting, like, you might look at someone and feel like, oh my gosh, they're really different for whatever reason, different cultures, different languages. And then you get to talking and you start finding similarities, or you get curious about what feels really different. And inevitably, that conversation around what is difference can often lead you to a similar thread. I would say, if you really want to get down to the core of it, as humans, we are these human beings living a life, and really people want to feel happy, feel like they're part of a community, and that's part of that feeling part of a community is actually one of the tenets to feeling happy. There's even science around that. So we want to feel joy, we want to feel gratitude, we want to feel awe, we want to feel connectedness. And in a way, I feel like it maybe sounds a little bit cliched, but it is so true, because in the end, we're all just trying to do our best. We really are. And we all, I really believe that we all are doing our best with the knowledge that we have. And I think it's also interesting to think about, there's so much of this wanting to, look outwards and look at the problems that are outwards, like problems in the community, and people are the problem. We can't change other people and we can't change situations, but we can change ourselves. So if we take a little time to focus on ourselves and how can we do our own healing, doing our own, however you want to say, be a better person or be the best that you can be. There's a lot of different ways to say that. If we all have the space and time to do a little bit of that and turning inwards, if we were all doing that as humans, then we're automatically going to be healing the collective. So it's like that concept of self-care really is community care, because if we're um, taking care of ourselves to heal ourselves so that we can help the community, so we can show up in a more embodied and full human way for others and the community.
And when it comes to that, I know it goes back to like how challenging the simple pause is, but even more challenging, just like even in this podcast and the photo project that came before it, asking people to recognize the phenomenal in them. It's kind
Mm,
of goes to the idea of, well, that's really a question about self-love and
yeah.
and how can we nurture that? In your experience, what's a good tip? Where's a good place to begin? I feel like, to your point, if we are taking that time to go inward, then externally, the ripple effect will continue. But that is such a block for so many. And it meant certain points of hey, day, week, month could be myself included. Like, where can we begin?
I feel like the first thing is to realize that we are all um, perfectly imperfect humans. There is that perfectionism can get in the way. And oftentimes, the biggest obstacle in our lives is ourselves. We get in our own way. So, how can we get out of our own way? Very specific example. There's many examples because it depends where you're at in your life, right? And what's going on. And it's very complicated and complex being human. So, isn't one simple solution. But I will say, I mean, the first thing would be to listen. Our body holds a lot of wisdom, and it's constantly like knocking on the door saying, "Hey, help. I need, pay some attention to me over here." It comes back to some of the basics is, well, there are the basics of have you had enough water today? Have you moved your body, right? These are physical things that our human body needs. We need movement and we need hydration to function. And then another thing is literally getting my feet on the ground out in nature, ideally barefoot, but if not, that's okay. Feeling that grounding power of Mother Earth supporting you. We can get really focused on ourselves and this sort of individualism, this view of uh, so focused on ourselves that we're forgetting that it's not just about us. There's the community, right? There's the interconnectedness. And so sometimes it can be really helpful to think then about, okay, what can I do to help someone else? What can I do to support someone else? And it doesn't need to be huge. It doesn't need to be like, oh, I'm going to go out and volunteer 20 hours a week at the shelter, or I'm going to donate $1 million. It can be as simple as reaching out to a friend or to someone is maybe having a tough time. Give them a call, send them a message. Just thinking about someone else and a different cause, getting you out of your own head and your own world, can also foster this sense of I'm helping someone else and I'm part of a community.
I find that when things get blurry, if you will, and no photographer wants the world to be blurry. That's a bad thing.
Hmm.
So when it does get like that, I realize that I am in my own way. And I say this
Hmm.
to my sons. I'm like, let's get out of our own way. And to your point, exactly that idea of checking in on somebody, doing something for somebody else, it just snaps you back into, oh, okay, I got this. This feels good. There's a different kind of exchange going on. And we can feel that forward progress, if you will, but also just that goodness that comes out of it. I don't think everything has to be uh, on exchange, right? It's not transactional. It's part of the flow, is what I think I'm hearing in the responses and the answers that you're giving me today. It's like, how can we be in a better state of flow so we can be our best selves?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey there, phenomenal listeners. It's Amy Boyle. If you're loving the stories and insights on the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Good Pods. Your 5-star reviews help us reach even more people and keep bringing you great content. Thank you so much for your support and being a part of our phenomenal community. Now back to the show.
Very well said. Thank you. As you were speaking about that example of getting out of your own way, for some reason, this image and this memory came to mind of one of the practices. I can't remember who the teacher was, but it was this experiment. You were meant to go out, and when you're out on a walk, anywhere or at the grocery store, anywhere you go, just smile at people. Smile. Make that your default, and it can be really, really interesting. Number one, it's contagious. You try it. You should try it. It's really fun. And maybe you have already tried this exercise, but like literally someone will look at you, and oftentimes, people are in their own world. They don't even realize what's on their face, what kind of mask is on their face. And then if you smile, well, sometimes people will be really surprised, just be like shocked. Oh my God, this person is smiling at me. And then, but oftentimes they'll match it with a smile, and everything changes. You can feel it, like you can feel the flow and the connection, and you don't even have to say anything. I mean, you can, but just that smiling it's contagious, and it's like, literally like everything lifts up and feels easier.
I love that very much. Hopefully, everyone listening to this episode will go out, and if there's one thing you can do today, it's free, right? They've said that for years.
True.
Smiles are free, and but they sure feel good to receive too. So be a part of that exchange and see how rich our lives can be.
Yes, well said.
I want to tap into a little bit on the certification for being a death doula and that space. Early on in season 1, I had Suzanne O'Brien on, and she's a death doula and trains people on end of life. But what has that experience been like for you? And my dad used to say, I pray for a happy death. That was like that was his thing. And that I can still hear to this day. So what does that all mean to you?
Huh. I got really curious about it because in general, I'm generalizing, of course, but in the United States, it's almost taboo to die. And the thing is, no one gets out alive. And we have this fear of death and dying. We have this fear of aging, but it's a natural process of being a human, of being alive. And so I just got really curious about that, and then started seeing how culturally different cultures actually will honor that part. They'll honor the elder community. They'll honor the wisdom of someone who's older. And so it's just getting curious about, well, like, what is the deal? What are we afraid of? And so I just started reading about it and learning about it. And actually now I'm remembering it also in grad school. I had a class that was specifically about death and dying. And so we had some deep conversations and readings and learning about that whole world, end of life, and some people call it death work. And I just realized it's just there's fear. I've found that one thing I can do is just start having the conversation with people, because it slowly gets softer. It's like, we can just ignore it and push it away, but it's always going to be there, and it's just going to keep popping its head up. So let's talk about it, maybe make friends with it, and then it's easier to hang out because we're friends now. And it's been an honor for me to be able to support people as they're going through the grieving process of losing a loved one. And that has been before, during, and after the process. And so it's another way of being of service to people. We need people to lean on. It takes a village, it takes a community. And so that's kind of been my path into that world. How can we make it, normalize it? Because it is, it's like, it's going to happen. So how can we make it more comfortable for people to talk about it and be in it?
I like the fact that you said greet it like a friend, because to that end, it's beyond our physical selves. It goes into that ripple effect.
Well, I think where I'm at right now, what I've found is that when we make room in our surrounding spaces, we automatically clear some of our inner spaces, and that brings a sense of ease. So there's when our space is clear, it's open, and there's room to breathe, for the breath to move. And all of a sudden, like, we feel lighter and we feel like we can move with more ease and expansiveness. So it's like there's this tidy environment around us. It's not just orderly. It's also liberating our mind from stress and overwhelm. And so then we can move forward with more focus and clarity. And then that connects into, when we're going into those inner spaces, okay, now we can look at, so we've gone from organizing the outer space. So how do we organize our inner space? Well, there's all of these mindfulness exercises or mindfulness practices, which for me includes breath work, it includes mindful walking, mindful eating, yoga, meditation. And it just depends on what you need in the day and in the moment. Like sometimes I practice yoga every day, but it might be 5 minutes one day, depending on what I need. So being able to clear that space so you can listen to what your body needs and what you're craving, to settle that inner space as well.
I'm so glad that you do all the things you do. And I wish more people, and hopefully the premise of this podcast, I think the subtag should be life is not linear, because I say that all the time as well. I've shown grad students that on a timeline when I had to write about my personal brand, and like, timeline, you think it's this year, this year, this year, this year with a little marker along the way. Oh, heck no. It's this curly cube of spaghetti that goes this way. I think more people need to embrace that, accept that as part of the awesome journey that we get the privilege of having. So I'm all for promoting nonlinear timelines. So, as far as our audience finding more about you, reaching out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can find me through my website. There's a contact page at holisticlifestudio.org. And there's also a link to my Instagram page. So you could go through there and contact me there, or LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn too.
I'll be sure that all those are linked in the show notes. And thank you for sharing your delicious view of life and living with us today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much, AB. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Speaking of Phenomenal. Be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and even share the podcast, as well as stay tuned for more inspiring conversations. Remember, each and every one of you is capable of extraordinary things. Until next time, take care and remember, you are phenomenal.